Hello, welcome to this week's edition of the Turning Points podcast. This week, we spoke with the lovely Trisha Kelly, who is the wife of Tom Kelly, who we had a few weeks ago. Wonderful, wonderful interview. Trisha is just a lovely, light, very open. She told us a couple very beautiful and powerful stories of her past, which tell us more about her past.
Yeah, so she's been on the Raja Yoga path for over 40 years, and following her and her husband follow the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda, the SRF Self-Realization Fellowship. That's a big mouthful. I'm going to be putting a link to all this stuff in the description of all what they taught, how to find Tom and Trisha. And Trisha teaches meditation online, and she also offers spiritual life coaching, which I am sure is divine.
I felt life coached too today.
Yes.
There was just a lot of great moments, a lot of great wisdom, a lot of very acceptance, a lot beautiful acceptance, and honesty throughout. So, if definitely dive into the interview. If you like the interview, make sure you stay tuned for the say more section afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, man, check them out. They're beautiful souls, and I'm sure you can feel some very good vibes from them. Hi, Trisha. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Sean. Good to be here.
It's so good to see you. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure. So good to see you too.
It's been a lot of years, and I really enjoyed talking with Tom Kelly, your husband, last week. When Sean and I started talking about doing this podcast, you were sort of the two on the top of my list.
Oh, we are honored. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we'll jump right in here real quick. So the question that we asked Tom and the question that we're asking all the guests, we're kind of exploring this idea of a moment or an experience or something that motivated or made you realize that the programming that you were raised with or the environment or the social surroundings no longer served you or were true for you, or some kind of a situation where it put you on another path. What was the turning point where you essentially became a spiritual seeker? So do you recall an individual moment or a time period in your life where that happened?
I feel very blessed. I'm one of these people that had an amazing childhood. Parents that loved each other, and they were both devout Catholics.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of love and devotion in the house. But I think and it laid a great foundation. But about maybe puberty, I was going to say middle school, but started thinking for myself. And not everything added up. And I found myself resisting catechism classes and some of the rules and the thoughts around women, the absolutes. And so, it's funny, and Corrine can probably identify with this, and maybe you too, Sean. When I went into show business, I was so bored with school that I actually got out of high school a little bit early, went up to New York, got into a show and started traveling because I wanted to see the world. And it was there on the road performing that there's a sense of loneliness and emptiness was there. And so I thought, well, maybe I should go back to Mass. I should go back to church. And I tried that once and it just didn't fill the space. And believe it or not, this guitarist in the show ended up saying to me, "You need to learn to meditate."
Wow.
That was it. You think now it's such a common thing, but back in the 70s, I was like, that's it. That's what I need.
Yeah.
And there it was. The trajectory changed. By the way, I ended up marrying the guy. Not because he said that.
Of course, the singer married the guitar player.
That's a tale old as time, man. So for you, it was, I'm assuming even when you were questioning the Catholic Church and we were kind of coming up with your own ideas, was it a rebellion from church, or was it more of realizing your ideals didn't align with the Catholic Church's ideals? Was there friction within the household when you kind of started to do your own thing?
And this is a credit to my mother's priest, because there was a bit of a rebellion, but not horrible, because there was a lot of respect in our family, and I would never hurt her or my dad. But I withdrew a little bit, and I'm the middle child, and I was typical middle child. The oldest has
all three of us. Yep.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And so is Tom, by the way.
Wow.
So, I have found as a middle child, I get a lot more freedom because the oldest has her place, the youngest had her place, and I was free. And that's what I needed. I needed my independence. And so much so at a young age, I just wanted to do my own thing, travel my own path, have my own thoughts. Then my mother went to her priest. And do you know what he said to her?
Huh?
He said, some children need less mothering. Some need more independence. So it made her feel better that she wasn't doing anything wrong. And she gave me that freedom to begin to think and feel. And when I did end up getting on the crazy yogic path and finding a guru, she was totally supportive because she could see that it fed my soul, and so was my dad.
That is incredible. Wow.
That's good to hear. That's a very open and very loving way of branching out from, the familial religious dogma into your own space, and realizing that it's more about, finding what you need versus, shoving down your throat what is supposed to be. That's very cool. I like that.
And they didn't go to fear. In other words, if you don't do this, then, wasn't it the burning in hell and any of that? And as a result of that, of their wisdom, there was never any wedge between us.
Beautiful.
I could talk to them about anything, and talk to them about meditation, talk to them about what I was learning. And it brought us closer.
That's so beautiful. I've got a young student right now who's, 21 years old, and his family is Church of Christ. And that's very, very, you're from the South, right, Trisha? So
no, I live
not
here.
Oh, okay.
I'm from Jersey.
Oh, you're Jersey girl.
South Jersey.
That makes more sense now, because I find New Yorkers, New Jersey, people in the Northeast they're culturally so much more open, because there is all different kinds of religions and colors up there. Mm-hmm. Like, on every corner, there's somebody from a different country. So I feel like Northeastern people or same with West Coast as well, are just very open.
Yes.
But anyway, my student came to me to learn how to meditate on his own. He's 21 years old. He had left with some depression, left music school. And because the Church of Christ thing just isn't working for him. And, but his parents did, let him, he's like, I'm going to learn how to meditate. And he's actually even becoming a meditation teacher now. But he struggled with whether to even tell his parents he doesn't feel comfortable in church anymore, and it's a hard thing for kids. And then, of course, India, I live in India part-time, and there fortunately are many families that are open, but there are also, unfortunately, many families that aren't open to their children marrying another religion, or it's both. So I think it's less, hopefully becoming more common, but back when we were young, I think less common. So beautiful to hear that was your path.
Yeah, I feel very blessed.
Okay, so you started meditating then in your 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then what was the next turning point?
So after I was we were in the show, and we got to Vegas. And show broke up, and I decided that what was available in performing for me in Vegas didn't align. And so
that's That's a great way
which is
to put
To
pretty
it.
easy, right?
to say it politely, yeah.
Yeah, to say it politely. And so I actually got into acting, and which took me to LA. I booked some work in Vegas, but then I made some connections that got me to LA. And but actually, I was doing a show in Vegas, and it was, you know, musical, obviously. And so when I wasn't needed, I was standing behind the curtain ready for my cue, and someone had given me Man's Eternal Quest by Paramahansa Yogananda. And I opened the book, I was reading, I'll never forget, the red curtain was in front of me. I'm reading, and I went, this is it.
Mm.
This is it.
Mm.
And that, then of course, next thing happened. I'm in LA, I've got work. And that's where, you know, the Lake Shrine, the international headquarters of Self-Realization Fellowship, it is all there. And so I moved there. By that time, I was married to the musician. And we were living in Burbank, of all places.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a spiritual experience. We were at the convocation, and we were meditating. There were thousands of people there, and we were meditating. And out of the clear blue, I hear this voice loud and clear, which was Yogananda's. He said, would you come and work for me?
Mm.
And I would. Now here, I remember I had 11 and a half years of education. The last couple of years had been in the entertainment business. I thought, what can I offer you? But I wanted to stand up and say, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But I had no idea. And next day, I happened to meet some of the nuns that, of course, worked. I didn't know this friend of mine happened to be a supervisor at the Mount Washington Mother Center. She said, I told her what happened. I said, I'm going to work here. She said, really? They don't have married ladies working there at that time. They only had nuns. And she said, really, you're going to work here? I told her what happened. And she got back to me and she said, I'm the supervisor of this department. Come in for a test. Come in for, the only thing I could do was type. So long story short, I got a job. And I was one of 2 married women that were working there. And I gave up my career. But do you know what? 2 points I want to make of that. First of all, isn't it interesting that Yogananda put it, would you come and work for me?
Mm-hmm.
He asked. It's about free will. But that free will was about to get tested again, because as soon as I got this call from Mount Washington, from the Mother Center, that I was accepted and that it was going to be giving a 6 months probation because they weren't sure, if the married thing was going to work. Literally, I hung up. I get another phone call. Back in the day, we didn't have cell phones, right? I pick it up. It's my agent. She said, and at that time, it was the 80s, General Hospital, or into the 70s, I can't remember, into the 70s, General Hospital was hot. The main actress was leaving. I had been on a couple of auditions, and she said, the director wants you to come in for a screen test. And I went, whoa, this is really bad timing. So it brought me to a crossroads, and I chose my spiritual path. I didn't go on that the screen test.
That's big. That was like a little test from the universe.
It was, what do you really want?
Yeah.
That's huge. I mean, one of the things that kind of comes up a lot actually, I think almost consistently in each interview is there's a certain gravity or intuition or something that pulls on a string inside of you that either shows you to look in a direction or calls you to go in a different direction. And most of the time it's the illogical decision. It's the one that, socially or class-based decision-wise wouldn't make sense. Why would you pass up possibly the biggest opportunity in acting to go, study yoga or, any kind of self-realization practice?
Serve a guru,
Yeah.
What motivated or moved you, if you can remember, in that time? How did you know that that was the direction you should choose?
I just knew.
Yeah.
I just knew.
I mean, you'd have to say no to a career path that you'd been on for quite some time. That's like almost the universe saying, just you being very clear. Because if you know what I'm saying, it's like, it makes it more clear. It's almost like when someone comes to you with the opposite, it helps to make it even more clear. It's that contrast. I mean, you had to be very committed to say no to that and very clear.
The hardest phone call I think I had to make was I had to call my agent back after, because I said, oh, great. I think about it. I knew she would work very hard for me. And to tell her that I was going to take a minimum wage job, which at that time was $5 and some cents an hour, and walk away from a lucrative acting career. That was, and there was like silence on the other end. But that was another test, that, and telling my husband and my family that this is the way I was going to go. Because like you said, Sean, there's a societal element, because everybody else would say, are you crazy?
Yeah. And that's definitely happened. I grew up in the music industry, and, Corrine also was in the music industry for many years. And, it's, for most people, it's like, oh, you had an opportunity to be an actor, or you had a, opportunity to, a path of self-reflection, and studying with a guru. The thing is, like, it's really hard if you haven't been in any kind of an entertainment industry. It's hard to say how difficult it is to turn down that kind of an opportunity. I mean, for 10 years,
right?
years, every opportunity you could possibly seize was the right thing. And so much, I think for us, it became a dysfunction where we were always looking for the next opportunity instead of just being present in the moment. So, I resonate with that phone call to your agent to say, no, I'm not going to take the audition of my life, my career, and I'm sorry to turn that down, even though I know you as an agent who only makes money if I take the, get the job. That's a hard position to be in. So, I mean, kudos for young you for making that decision. And can you recall, did it feel complete after you did tell her and finally make that phone call afterwards? Did you feel good about that, or were you like, oh shit, I just made the biggest decision of my life?
I never regretted the decision.
Beautiful. Awesome.
And never questioned yourself.
No.
Wow.
No, it definitely came from my higher nature. And I really believe, that in the yogic path, we talk, one of the beliefs is reincarnation and karma. And I know beyond any shadow of a doubt that before I came down, this was written. I was told, this is what you'll do, and then this is what you'll do. And I know why I had to be an entertainer. And Corrine, maybe you can identify with this. I was naturally an introvert, artistic person, but an introvert. Getting on stage every night and then going into film and television, that gave me the poise, the confidence, the ability to do that I ended up doing, and that is ended up being teaching meditation myself, yoga teaching, establishing the community. Without that, I would have been tripping over myself and just been in fear all the time. So it's just a beautiful, they just laid it out really beautiful.
Mm-hmm. I get that, because when I started teaching yoga, I was like, oh, this is just like singing. It's just like being in front of an audience singing. I'm just like, here is my audience, my students, and I'm talking, and I'm very comfortable because I've been on stage. So yeah, definitely lays the groundwork for that. That's so beautiful. So you started working in your 20s then at SRF in LA.
Yes.
I didn't know that. And then when did you become a yoga teacher?
Not until I didn't even practice Hatha yoga. I practiced Raja yoga, the meditative and the philosophical, metaphysical aspect. And it wasn't until I had a couple of kids and my back was killing me that someone said, hey, you should do some hatha yoga, which did the trick. And I didn't become a yoga teacher. That wasn't even my idea. So again, it was the husband. Meanwhile, one husband leaves. 8 years later, Tom comes out of the monastery. We get married in 2000. And he said, let's study yoga. Let's become yoga teachers. That's in line with what we've done. So again, it wasn't even my idea, but didn't start teaching until, and even then it took some coaching. He went in first, and then maybe about 2001, 2002, I jumped in.
So you get this job with it was with SRF, and you a typist? Were you what was your kind of admin?
I worked in correspondence department, and this was the beautiful thing. So I would type the letters going out, and those letters contained teachings and counseling, because that's how they did it back then, was through letters. So all day I was being inspired. The students would ask these questions, and I got to type the answers. And at first I was lousy, by the way. You know, they had carbons. And so when you made a mistake, you had to erase it. Oh my gosh.
Mess, big mess.
I can't believe that they kept me.
But as you're failing at a typist position, you're actually getting some of the most. That was a joke, by the way. I'm sure you were.
I know, it's pretty good.
You're actually getting to basically be this kind of bird's eye view, objective viewer of, you know, a student's question and the teacher's answers, and you get to kind of watch this dance between. And also, I'm assuming you were a student also at that time. So were you also interactive in that process where you got to ask questions too, or were you more from that position just observing that teaching and questioning?
I was observing it, but I was learning. I realized that there was training. It was spiritual training.
Yeah.
And I caught on pretty quick. And so after the 6 months, and they said, you know, you're welcome to stay. I eventually, they began to train me as what they called a letter writer, so that I could answer some of the questions. And the beauty of that is, you know, there were so many people, nuns, there were nuns, ladies that were waiting to be accepted into the ashram, and they were the people that I was working with, plus the nuns themselves. And some of them had very mundane, regular admin jobs. So I was so privileged that every day my consciousness was in Yogananda's teachings.
Wow.
I know, for 20 years.
Wow.
Then they showed me something that I had no idea. I didn't realize that I was good at research. They discovered it because they said, well, look up this. So I was able to collate it pretty quickly. They said, you're good at research. And I went from correspondence to editorial department. And always again, in the teachings, really blessed. So that prepared me, that prepared my consciousness, I think, for that time where we established the Soul of Yoga, and we became the mom and pop of this community.
So Soul of Yoga, Sean, and to our listeners, is a wonderful yoga studio where I met Tom and Trisha that they created in Encinitas, just north of San Diego.
Gotcha.
That's what she's talking about, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, very cool.
The yoga community. Oh, yeah, I jumped there, didn't I?
Yeah, that's all right. That's all right. And what, you know, it's so funny how people touch our lives and instances touch our lives, and we don't realize the ripple effect until we hear a story back. We just, you know, we know, but it's wonderful to hear it. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know and what I tell people, Tom and Trisha did the smartest thing I've ever heard for a yoga studio. Is they started off in their home.
Yeah.
And so they had no overhead, and they waited until they were busting out of their home and they had to get a yoga studio before they moved. And then they started again in a small room, and then they didn't grow and I tell, there's so many people that want to start too big and have too many expenses, and they go under within the first year because of that. And you two are probably the only people I know that were so smart and started like that. Especially yoga studios are hard. They come and go so fast.
very thin, bottom line, as you know. And by the way, I've been studying what you did since you moved to Nashville. That, what do you call your home? It's so beautiful.
Yeah, it's the Ivy House.
The Ivy House. Yes. And I looked at that because I said to Tom when we moved to outside of Atlanta, I said, well, look, Corinne's already doing it, and you had such a great blueprint. I said, maybe we should do that.
Oh, guys, seriously, you have to come here when things open up and see our place. It's a beautiful old. It's actually a home from 1917. And it was actually built by the Ivies in 1917. It's on Ivy Street. That's why we call it the Ivy House. But also ivy grows towards the light. So our logo is like ivy growing towards the light. And it's a 3,000 square foot house on a full acre of land on a corner lot. So I've got a parking lot in the front, a parking lot in the back. So I've got parking for what, Sean? Like 10 people minimum, 15.
Way more. Yeah.
And then I've got I've got to put a garden in the front yard that's like a 40-foot by 40-foot garden. I've got a garden in the back. I've got, so it's organic foods. I mean, it just fell into, the universe, God, just, it's like, I thought maybe one day in the back of my mind, I'd like a yoga studio that I lived at. I thought, and my friend, one of my yoga students actually had this house. I saw this because we've had it 10 years now. So 20 years ago when she bought it,
Wow.
I walked in here to do the walkthrough, and her and her husband were going to buy it. And I said, oh my gosh, I'd love to live in a house like this, because outside, I'm in my bedroom right now. Outside my bedroom is a 450 square foot yoga studio with a fireplace that's just like no walls, all hardwood floor, all windows around the whole thing. And then you walk up the stairs and there's an attic that we've turned into a meditation studio. So, and then we had the bunkhouse for a while where people stayed, but then it got a little bit too much for us to have people staying here while we did. But I have my classes here. I can teach meditation here. Sean helped me move in here.
Yes,
So that's how we met 10 years ago. He came to my yoga class and he got a newsletter. I think it was a year later, because I think I went to India or something. And he saw that I taught meditation. So he sends me this really cute email. He's like, I really want to learn meditation. I really need it, but I'm a starving musician and I've got a baby. My wife has her first child on the way. And I saw you do barter. Do you want me do any recording? I saw that you sing. And I said, well, I don't need any recording right now, but I'm sure I'll need something. And within a couple of weeks, I said, can you help me move in to this place? And there's a lot more story that I won't go into detail on, but how it came about. My roommate who ended up buying the house, and it's a very special. And so we have a spare room with your and Tom's name on the door.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah. So thank you for checking that out. I feel every day I want to kiss the ground that I live here, and during quarantine I meditate 2-3 hours a day. I'll do a Zoom class, I'll do a coaching call, then I'll go to the garden, and I just feel so blessed.
So you deserve it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that you and Tom's? Is that your intention in Atlanta?
Georgia, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're outside of Atlanta.
Okay, cool. Is that kind of because you guys just recently moved to Georgia? Are you planning on kind of picking up from where you left off in California and doing a yoga studio, or what's your plans there?
I
didn't ask Tom this question. I only asked you this question. So,
well, we came. My two daughters. I have 2 daughters, 3 grandchildren, and both of my daughters are related to the film and television industry, which out in Atlanta is just booming.
Right.
It's amazing. And you can buy a house here. I mean, they weren't thriving in North County, San Diego. It's just the overhead is for a young family, just too much. So they came. Shauna had a movie here. Serena saw it. They both moved out. They're both doing really well. They own their own homes. They're working beautifully. And so I used to come out, because I'm pretty attached to my girls and my grands. I used to come out every other month and spend some time. And I saw the home prices 3 years ago. So we ended up investing in a home that we're living in now, and just loving the area. having been born, and they didn't ask me this question, but I just have to say that
Oh,
coming from Southern California, where it's really dry and you worry about water and rain, Corinne, you probably feel this way too. And then you come to a place that has trees
yeah.
and lakes and rivers and brooks and you, for me, a Jersey girl, that's where I grew up. You know, that kind of greenery and lushness. So it just feels very alive here with some mild seasons. We came with the thought of staying 6 months. We rented our home out in Encinitas, and we said we're just going to stay here for 6 months. Now we've been here a year and plus, and we've sold our home in Encinitas, so cut those ties.
Ah,
So Soul of Yoga has been purchased, and we own 15% of it. We're still very, very close to the new owner, and he's just brilliant, Ryan Stanley. And he asked us recently, because of COVID, they've expanded their online offerings, including the institute. They call it the Soul of Yoga Institute, where we teach yoga teacher training and that sort of thing, which you have to do to pay the bills.
yeah.
Is just going through the roof. It's supporting the yoga studio. So he asked us, he said, would you work with us again and do some online things? So we are getting to that point now where we'll be working more. But Tom is 70,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a couple years younger. And so, you know, it takes a lot more energy that you have in 70 and 66 to own your own yoga studio.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we laughed when
Yeah.
Trisha and I knew why we laughed.
You know,
Yeah.
so
Well, and that's the thing is, I'm sure you guys are very well versed in the listening practice of meditation, and I'm sure the right thing will come to you at the right moment. And that's what's been interesting about this year is, so you guys were already kind of had made that move before quarantine, so now it's this pandemic and this whole year has been kind of a blessing and a curse depending on what you put your focus on, of course. And you've had family time. I mean, that's kind of the biggest gift is you've been able to spend, I'm sure, a lot more time with family and your grandkids, and the rest will develop and blossom as it needs to, I'm sure. And I'm hoping that's a lesson that kind of starts to permeate our culture more than just these small little cultures that we exist. This listen, pay attention, and then move through life with intention instead of just grabbing on for dear life and letting life drag you through, the muck of society and whatnot. So,
yeah.
excited for you guys to, be on that adventure.
There was another adventure that I had gotten on before we came here. We were always telling people when we opened the Soul of Yoga, it was a spiritual community. It is a spiritual community. But I couldn't teach, Tom and I couldn't teach the kind of meditation, Kriya Yoga that we practice, because you take a vow not to. It is diksha. It is it's part of the guru disciple relationship. So it's not something you can get online. It's something you have to commit to. So for a long time, we were telling our students, our community, meditate, but we couldn't teach them how we did it. And I couldn't find something that really resonated with me, something powerful, until I came across a mystic clairvoyant by the name of Barbara Martin, who wrote a book called Change Your Aura, Change Your Life. And I got in touch with Barbara and Dimitri, her co-writer and spiritual director of Spiritual Arts Institute. And I talked to them, read the book, and I said, I started practicing the technique. And I said, this is powerful. It's meditation with divine light.
Okay.
So in order to learn it, I became a student of this metaphysical school. It's a modern day mystery school.
It's nice.
The teachings are powerful. And anyway, one thing led to another. I did begin to teach it at the Soul. There were quite a few people interested. Barbara and Dimitri moved to Encinitas from LA, opened up a center, a physical space, because they had always been virtual.
Okay.
Ahead of the time. So then they had a physical space, a virtual, and I led the Soul of Yoga to help them establish the Institute in Encinitas, which happened to be right across the street from the Soul of Yoga.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I was, so I eventually became a healer, a direct divine light healer. And now I teach meditation as well. So all that can be done virtually. So I actually haven't had a lot of downtime since COVID started. People talk about having 2-3 hour meditations and sitting in their garden, and I'm like, wow, that sounds nice. Because when I moved here, I started working virtually, and nothing changed.
Well, I think you have those times in your life. Yeah, I certainly have had stints where I've worked a lot.
Yeah.
And this time for me, I knew was not that. So, but I'm so happy to hear that you've been available for people for that support, because so many people need that support right now. There's, people are feeling isolated, and, our community that we know that's been doing the spiritual work for the most part is doing quite well because we have the tools, but there are a huge amount of people that do not have the tools. And it's one of the reasons why we're doing the podcast, it's just to help support people. I loved autobiographies growing up. I love hearing people's stories and sort of what happened to them and what helped them. And yeah, and so I feel like just sharing stories, sharing these spiritual turning points, and then how our life is affected by these turning points. And because the feeling that I'm getting from you, and also from knowing you and Tom, but hearing more of your story, is that when you devote yourself to a practice, to, in your case, the guru, the life really is quite smooth. Like that was going to be a question for you, actually, is because you did go through a divorce and you did have children. So do you mind sharing like how your spiritual practice has helped you through that difficult time?
Yes, because without it, it would have been 100 times harder.
Yeah.
So I had been on the spiritual path probably 12 or 13 years before the split happened. And quite frankly, another thing that happened was that I was warned. I was spiritually warned that my husband was going to leave. And I went into a panic. I thought, I'm going to do everything I can, because we had hit a bumpy road. I was deeply committed to the spiritual. He had decided that he was not. Let's just put it that way. And anyway, he ended up meeting and falling in love with his soulmate. And, decided that, that was the love of his life, and left. And I don't think I moved or slept or ate or anything for 3 full days. It was like a train hit me, but I was still alive. It was that devastating.
Mm-hmm.
It shocked me. Even though I had spiritually been warned, I knew. So it didn't lessen the shock, because all of a sudden, because at that time I was a stay-at-home mom, I didn't really have an income. We had moved from California to Florida. So what ended up happening is I ended up getting my job back in Mount Washington at the Self-Realization International headquarters. And I had to move my girls from Florida, which is a place that they really loved. We lived in a small beach town, back to the city. It's so hard, so hard. And if it wasn't for my meditation practice and the community, because I went back to working with the nuns and they were so supportive. Yogananda said, environment is stronger than willpower.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's the
I have
quote of
found
the night.
the quote of the decade. Because I had my own spiritual practice, but without that environment, without that support, I just don't know. Now, my children, my girls were 11 and 8. They didn't have that support. They had me, but I had just been thrown into the role of living below the poverty line with 2 daughters. I felt like a refugee. We had nothing.
Wow.
It was so hard. It was so hard on them. It was so hard on me. So we survived. But I made mistakes. lots of mistakes that I wish I hadn't, but just I was young, I was scared. But again, the spiritual practice kept me connected to the divine, which kept me connected to now this, now that, learn to forgive, just everything. But it was hard.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
It was the hardest time I ever went through in my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I have not been through that, but I can imagine what that would be like, having three kids, and I can.
Two.
Well, I'm sorry, I have three kids, so
Yeah. Oh, it's about you. I thought you were talking about me.
I can imagine what that would be like to, be on your own. And, my wife and I, we've been together for, 18 years, and we've had,
Since they were 14 years old.
you're 14. So, well, that's almost 20 years now, damn it. So, it's one of those things where we've had those rough patches. And one of our biggest core values as a family is, having, somebody at home present, not having daycare as much as possible. And we recognize how important it is to create the most secure environment possible is to have, a strong support system. And, in that situation, I can imagine moving cross country, like you said, in below the poverty line, not having, huge support outside of your spiritual community. If you didn't have that, man, you'd be in pure survival mode even more so, right? Not having anything to trust, not having anything to guide, and you're just, kind of flailing in the wind. So the fact that you had that is huge, man. And, I commend you for going through that, because I think that happens too much in our culture where, you can be a single parent. You can do it. You wouldn't wish that on anybody, would you? I imagine not.
It was hard on me, but it was devastating for my daughters.
Yeah.
Devastating. And that was the hardest part, is watching them suffer.
Mm.
And everything suffers, right? Their relationship with men, trust,
Yeah.
abandonment issues. I mean, and on and on. Then they go to a new school and there's cliques. It was so painful. But, it
Somehow you get through it.
You get through it, and it gives you, and when you do, your faith and your trust are stronger than ever.
And that's another thread that we've been finding.
Yeah. Faith, trust,
Yeah.
spiritual faith. It's one of those things that it's almost like it's a strange paradox, the relationship with faith, because you're almost constantly tested by faith. It's almost like you're constantly tested, but it's not faith that's testing you. It seems like there's always something in your field of view as you're walking the path that's trying to convince you not to have faith, or trying to convince you not to trust. And you're always weighing and second guessing that. And it's funny, I don't remember, it's all kind of blurring together, whether it was a conversation Corinne and I or one of the podcasts where, it's like, I know to trust. I know to listen. I know that always works out. There's been too many times, too many serendipities, too many, circumstances where trust was tested and proved itself time and time again. And yet I will constantly question that command, that voice, or that, whatever that spiritual space is that's calling me to do something. And I'm always, are you sure? And and what's interesting, and what I think, when it's the higher self, or whatever your dialogue is for that, is when it doesn't call you out. It's very patient with you. It'll tell you to do something. It'll guide you. You don't listen 10, 15 times, and it'll always bring you the same message, right? It's always patient. It's always kind. It's always accepting. It's always, well, this is for you to take. This is for you to walk. And you don't always have to, but it's way better, and you suffer way less if you listen in that first space and just go with the gravity.
That's so true. It's so true and well put. And I noticed there's another aspect of faith, and I want to mention this for anybody that's listening, because through the important parts of my time, my life, the really hard ones and the really great ones, I've had the kind of connection that I guess I brought in from a previous life where I could get direct or very powerful indirect guidance. But sometimes for people around me, including my first husband, when he would see what my relationship with the divine was like, and he compared it to what he was getting from meditation, he figured, why should I bother? I'm not getting anything. You know, his relationship, his experience in meditation was different than mine. You know, I also have a teacher, a friend, very, very powerful. So in other words, let's just put it this way. To anybody listening, never compare yourself with another person.
Yeah.
Never try, just because they might have a little clairvoyance or a little clairaudience or anything like that, that does not mean they are further along in the path. It does not mean that they're any closer to God than you are. Tom tells a very powerful story where he was going through, I don't know if he told you the story, but when he was a young postulant, it's a great story. He was a young postulant, and this brother monk who had been there a very long time that everyone respected, he was just a beautiful, wise, in touch man, and he would correct them. And Tom would get ignored. And finally, he went to this brother and he said, why don't you ever correct me? Talk to me. You know, I don't care if you yell at me. You don't say anything to me. And this very wise monk knew what kind of training Tom needed. And he said, you, my son, get it by not getting it. That was Tom's training, was to be ignored, because he was raised as this kind of spoiled little rich kid. And this very wise monk knew, you need to be humbled.
Wow.
So never, ever compare yourself, because whatever you are going through is what you need. Yeah. And it's going to take you home.
Yeah.
Man, that is awesome. Thank you very much for putting it that way, because, you know, that is a mechanism of the ego to compare, to contrast, and it will, you know, ultimately, if you look for ways other people are more spiritually advanced than you, you're going to see them. You're going to find that, you know, that's what's going to come to your field of view. But if you accept that it's not about that, you know, experience, it's not about comparing yourself. It's not about, you know, wow, they've been meditating for 40 years. They must be further along. Maybe, who knows? And how could you judge that? And it's not for any of us to judge in the first place. And like you said, it's, you know, there's a special recipe that Spirit, God, life has for us. And it comes in very unique ways. And it's almost maddening. When you said that, where he said, you get it by not getting it, like, that's, you feel that resonates your core, and that drives you crazy, right? You know, but all of those mechanisms, you know, it deprograms the things that don't serve you. You know, ultimately that kind of wisdom, it really strips you of all the things that don't serve you. And the idea is to constantly put yourself in experiences of being humbled, of being, you know, in awe, and finding faith, and just staying in the gratitude of your own journey, of your own experience. And that's beautiful, man. I thank you very much for making that point, because that's very important, you know. And sorry, I'm rambling because I had some yerba mate and it's caffeinating me. I'm going nuts. But it's funny how, you know, spiritual communities can devolve to such competition or such ego resistance, because and I'm guilty of this hundreds, thousands. I'm sure Corrine could tell you a million stories of watching this unfold for me, you know, as a young seeker, and it ultimately, it doesn't serve anybody in any community to have that that holier than thou, or that lesser than thou kind of attitude. You know, you have to be humble and focused on your walk, your your journey and be inspired by as many things that inspire you, and go towards that let those as inspirations be gravities that pull you along, through that journey, instead of, stumbling behind somebody else.
Well,
Go ahead,
go ahead.
Trisha. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you compare yourself, you mentioned the ego, Sean. If you compare yourself to someone else, the ego would do what I was saying before to someone, to say, well, why should I bother?
Yes.
The ego will give up because it's too much trouble to have faith.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's too much trouble, too much work to have trust.
It is. It is a lot of work, and it's constant. And that's why, I think that's why the meditation practice is so important, because it keeps you in that state of listening, of questioning, of, of observing, and really taking that experience in. And that's what's different about, patterns and habits that are programs, and practices that are intentional. Meditation practice that's intentional. Every day you do this, not habitually just because it's the thing to do, but because that's what keeps you in the present moment of your own journey.
And that's what keeps your meditation fresh. And, normally, in other words, why am I doing this? Why am I sitting down morning and evening? That has to be, this is like a marriage, right? You have to renew it. It's a relationship, but this relationship is with God. And, normally, under normal circumstances, especially for years, I've been on the spiritual path now over 40 years. So normally, for years, I would not talk about my experiences. I talk about the experience of, so there was another monk. I actually had a spiritual experience at the SRF Lake Shrine in Pasadena, the Pacific Palisades, that was obvious to everybody around me. And it disrupted the meditation. And the monk who was leading the meditation said to me later, he said, what happened? And I told him, and he said, no, that's not what happened. You fell asleep. And I was like, whoa, no, that's not what happened. So anyway, I did some research. I figured out what happened. I went to this other monk and I said, I didn't fall asleep. This is where I found it in this scripture. And do you know what he said to me? This is where it got into. He said, here was the lesson. Here's another lesson along that. He said to me, never tell anyone about this experience. He said, they will forgive you your flaws, but they will never forgive you your goodness.
Ooh.
Because we want people to be like,
Yeah, in transcendental meditation, they used to call it bliss envy. There's so many different reasons not to talk about things. People don't, because you can't ever convey what happened to you anyway. Even though I am writing a book about my turning points.
But there's a time and place for everything.
Yes,
like I said, now it feels safe. Maybe it will help. But that's why I had to make that point is, don't listen to me and think that this is the way your life should look.
Yes. Yeah. Well, sorry, I had to pause. That hit me. They will forgive you your flaws, but not your goodness. I mean, that hit me. That hit me really hard. I had to take a moment. Normally, I would have a lot to say about that, but that struck me, deeply, because it feels like when you tried to express. I mean, you had a divine experience. It was true for you.
It was life-changing.
And when you tried to express that or explain that to other people, it's almost like you were bringing that situation down, or you were almost lessening it by trying to articulate it. I mean, and that's kind of somewhat, I guess that's a metaphor for God. I mean, for the divine. I mean, we use these words that doesn't really complete. You say God, but it doesn't really complete the wholeness. We oftentimes dumb down experiences by trying by trying to articulate them, and that was kind of hitting me when you said that. And but the forgive you of your goodness it's like, wow. I mean, that's a huge moment of clarity and learning, then to know your truth and hold it pure without validation, without anything from anybody outside. Sorry, that's just feels a lot.
Okay, so now will you share it with us?
What happened? Oh, wow.
No pressure.
Okay, this will bring us around to the beginning, and I'll make it very brief. Being raised Catholic, you die, and the story is it's either heaven or hell. So even though I had a lot of devotion and I thought I had faith in God, I didn't realize that I had an unconscious fear of death. Because what if God was in a bad mood the day I died? I mean, it sounds absurd, but that's how my child's mind figured it out. So in this meditation, the breath was sucked out of my lungs, and that's why everybody knew I made this loud noise. Lost the breath, and I fell over on this tiny little woman sitting next to me, and I was not breathing. And so but I could hear, just like they say when you die, you can hear. I could hear someone say, "Is there a doctor in the house?" My husband was sitting next to me. They took me, they laid me down. There was a doctor. They tried working on me, and someone had the idea of working the acupuncture points. And little by little, I came back. Well, I had the experience of going down the tunnel and going through the light, and they brought me back. And then they had to walk me around the lake a little bit because my life force had withdrawn from the limbs and from the nerves. And so what that did for me, and that's why the monk said to me, "What happened to you?" And he said, "You fell asleep." He thought I snored or something. I knew I had not, because it took me halfway around the lake. I mean, this is a huge 1-acre lake, to get the life force back through my body. But it was a game changer, because not only from that point on, I could meditate more deeply because I was no longer afraid of God. The biggest thing that I was afraid of was death. And I experienced conscious death. And the reason I knew that is because what came into my lap the day after? Life After Life, that book by Moody that came out in the 70s about people's experience. He did studies, Dr. Moody did studies on people who had near-death experiences. In other words, they died and they came back. And this book is about what they experienced as they died. That's what I experienced. So that's when I went to this other monk that I had gotten a better friendship with. And I said, "I died." And that's when he gave that great line. But from that day for a long time, I just wanted to go. I wanted to die because it was so beautiful. Everything about it was so freeing. This sounds really crazy, but from then time I would drive. We went and did a trip. Tom was doing some public speaking in Detroit, and they have these beautiful old graveyards. I remember they drove by, and I was like, someday it's going to be my turn.
Yeah.
Now I've gotten past that, and I realize I have a reason to be here, and I'm grateful to be here. But God knew, the Holy Ones knew, Yogananda knew that I needed that. I needed to drop that fear. And the only way for me to drop that fear was to walk through it. So I invite you, everybody who's listening, what you fear the most. When they say Job in the Bible, he said, "What I feared the most has come upon me." If going through something you fear the most, this is your time for freedom.
Beautiful.
That hit me hard. You just hit me really hard, because I fell apart last week, and Patty asked me, "What are you afraid of?" And you just basically the next week said, "Do what you're afraid of, find that fear and go towards that fear." I mean, that is huge, man, and that doesn't sound crazy at all. I it's different, talking about death, welcoming it because you're not afraid of it versus, hastening your death because you're fed up with life or you can't, those are two different things. I mean, and you're very nonchalant about either one. Well, I'll stay here, I'll go. Whatever is my calling, I'll go freely. I mean, that's what it feels like on this end of it. And that is something that I think is a beautiful way to go, is to welcome that next adventure, and you've had a taste of that next adventure, the other world, the world of God, and being able to bring that back and kind of being a light for that, next adventure is huge, man.
It's beautiful over there.
Mm-hmm. What a great sharing, Trisha. Thank you so much. What a very, very beautiful sharing.
Well, thank you. And you write that book, all right?
I'm working on it. It's a process for sure. It's a long process, but a joyful process for sure. It's about the spiritual, not just the memoirs, because who cares about my life, but I have had a lot of spiritual turning points. I just mean, who would care about my story other than me?
I think, well, like you said, I love autobiographies. I love reading about especially women. We haven't even gotten into that, but it's time for the women's story and the women's strength, and
absolutely.
Learn from one another, and men too.
Well, we've had our time, and we have it's interesting. Corinne knows where I stand. I'm very middle of the road between male and feminine energies. I don't.
He's very well balanced.
Very well balanced, and I think it's interesting to watch this change, because I see the what's the word, dysfunctional masculinity being challenged right now, and it's kind of funny to watch from somebody who's done a lot of work to maintain that balance. Watching that dysfunction manifest as fear and just possessiveness and overaggression. It isn't the way, and it isn't going to serve us as a community. You have to bring both those energies together. When they're in union, it's fantastic, and so I look forward. I'm thankful to be a part of a generation that gets to watch, where we are and then where we can go by bringing that feminine energy in and welcoming that instead of just being terrified of it, which I see so often, and I don't get it, but.
Well, thank you for helping to co-create that equanimity.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting. I grew up in the Midwest, and my family was raised we did not, there are certain roles, of course, generationally, but I was raised and taught, there's equanimity in our relationship. There's not dominant male. There's not imbalance in any way in our relationship. And, I think we've done a lot to maintain that. And I want to see that more in the world, because it's way, way healthier. It's way healthier.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I think that's a wrap.
Yeah, that's a place to stop. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for, going into some of those, deeper experiences. And we could talk probably for another 2 hours, and, we'll have to have both you and Tom back, maybe as a duo at one point. That would be kind of fun.
That would be fun.
So, but yeah, thank you again very much.
No, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. All right. Welcome to this Say More section with Trisha Kelly. That was intense, man. It's interesting that there's people that exist that just carry an honesty and openness about them. That's what I felt very, very deeply with her. They're very much, her and Tom were both very much, this is what we got. This is where we're at. This is where you're at. Love yourself for it. Forgive yourself for it. There's not any kind of judgment or, persecution attached to themselves, to other people. It doesn't feel that way. It feels very like, it's almost like they're rooting you on energetically as you're talking to them. Just like you,
I like that.
very uplifting.
I like that.
Just in the space, and she mentioned that at one point where um, the space is more powerful than your willpower, or the space is more powerful than will.
Well, your community, that's a Yogananda quote. The community is
Yes.
more stronger than your willpower.
Yes.
But you converted it to space, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of when I look at it. It's, the community creates a space. It creates
Yes.
it creates a connectedness and a support system. Even if you're not necessarily with a large group of people, like if just knowing that you have that to lean on for questions, for the chaos that ensues in your mind along the journey. I mean, that's huge, and that's what Ivy House has been for me. I mean, that's pulled me through so many different situations. I mean, on countless occasions for reasons that were not even obvious in the beginning, going into situations. So I think that it's a very powerful tool, and they seem to they seem to lean on that very much. And she leaned on, when you talked about the yoga studio and how powerful that was, and how great of an environment they had there when you met them, and yeah, it just makes you feel good.
Yeah. Yeah, they hold space. It's a hard thing to explain to people that don't know what that means to
Yeah.
hold space, but I experienced it with my teacher Saul David Ray tremendously. He teaches vinyasa yoga, and he holds such a space when he walks in a room that when I do vinyasa with him, it's like effortless, because it's like he's breathing with you, and it's like usually something that I would find very difficult on my own to do, like a heavy, strenuous, not strenuous, but like it's a vinyasa flow that's not easy. On my own is easy, but when I'm in class with him, it's like I'm floating.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how Tom's yoga class used to be too. Well, his was like church. His was a little different. His was like preaching it the whole time. And I do remember Tom saying that. It's like, this is your community. She said that their soul of yoga was they create a spiritual community, which is what I've always said about Ivy House too. Because the gravity of your childhood and your belief systems and your conditioning can very easily drag you down. And I think that's what that statement is. It's like, your willpower is weak against the gravitational pull of conditioned habits, whether it's smoking or drinking or thinking negative thoughts or whatever. And so the more we can surround ourselves with like minds that think like us, that will keep us out of that gutter of our own thinking, that have healthy habits and eat healthy instead of junk food. It's like, you are who you surround yourself with. I mean, that sounds like a weak thing to say, but it is so true. You need support.
Yeah. Well, it's both. It's both a weakness if you're not if you don't have an accountability in a group, in a community. If it's ego driven, that's going to drive you, and you're gonna slip and fall, and you're going to create patterns of, very ego driven, programmed patterns. If you're an alcoholic and you hang out at a bar, you're probably going to fall back into negative patterns more easily than if you're in a organization, AA, or with a community that is, let's find healthy practices to create new programs, to create new healthy habits, and it is based on intention and habit, or and accountability. I think is one of the strongest elements of a community in a space like that. And that's what I think is so strong with in the interview. There's accountability. I feel looked at. I feel reflected on. I feel there's an awareness paying attention to me. But it's a welcoming awareness. It's saying, I can't wait to see what unfolds from you, kind of an experience. And it is an accountability, but it's not a judgmental accountability. And I think those two things kind of get conflated sometimes, where it's like, all right, accountability means if I do something and I fuck up, they're going to call me on it and they're going to bash me. And it's like, no, accountability is kind of like, at some point we started talking about when you get that voice or that space or that lesson, or that there's there's a lesson or a guidance from a meditation or from a space of a practice, and you don't listen. Nothing changes about that message. That message is still the same, and it'll come back to you, and it's like, no, you need to go here. Well, you don't listen again. That message doesn't become judgmental on you. That message or spirit or whatever that awareness is that is trying to guide you, it knows that if you don't follow that gravity, you will suffer on your own account. It doesn't need to impart any more suffering or struggle or judgment on you. And that's what I think is interesting. I guess the last 4 or 5, I mean, it's hard. They're kind of, there's been so many podcasts now, Corinne. I can't parse out each one, but there's this gravity, this awareness, and this consciousness that is being reflected by the guests at various times, and that was very present today. And I don't know if it just feels good to be listened to.
Of course it does. Of course it does. Because, our experience with most people, and it's not that they're, bad people. We have many, you and I both have many good people in our lives, but most people are thinking about their response rather than really listening to the person.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's, most of the people that come on this podcast are good listeners.
Yeah.
That's what they do. And I have a funny story that came to me, actually. So, I listen to people for a living now. That's what I do. I listen, spiritual I do spiritual life coaching, and even in the meditation, people have their stuff come up, and they talk, they tell me their experiences, and we listen. And that's sort of one of my, I want to say gifts, or, I think I'm an empath, and I can really feel people. And because I have so many years on the path, and have sort of done many, like Trisha did Yogananda path mostly. That was her thing. I've kind of read all the books and studied with a lot of the gurus up. And so I can kind of cut down the fat when I work with people and say, okay, I listen to them and I think, okay, I think this book would be good for you, this. And so, so I feels like this is who I am now, right? But I have to tell you this story. Did I ever tell you the story of the retreat that I went on with Gary Zukov years ago? He's a famous spiritual author, and a friend of mine, Sarah McLean, who we're going to have on in January, was working with him. We met through Deepak, Sarah and I did. So Sarah's working with Gary Zukov, and she invites myself and a friend of mine to the Gary Zukov seminar. There's 40 attendees at Mount Shasta in California. And I think we're being invited to play music, because we had played music for Gary at this church he spoke at. We sang a few songs, and they said, come and do the retreat. And I thought it was to sing. Well, I guess it was apparently to participate, which is great. Usually the retreats I used to sing at, I used to participate in too. But this was like an opening circle of 40 people that started at 2:00 in the afternoon. And usually in an opening circle, you say, just briefly introduce yourself and say why you're here, and just take, a couple minutes, because there's a lot of people to get through. Well, they start off by saying, speak as long as you want. Tell us your story. Tell us your story. And of course, when you go on a spiritual retreat, usually there's some pain that brought you there, right? So we continue for 4 or 5 hours in this circle, listening to everybody's shit.
Yeah.
And I wanted to cry. So in the middle of the night, I woke up, major stomach pains. I'm staying in a little cabin. There's no indoor toilet. I have to go to an outhouse, and I have everything coming out both ends. It's coming out both ends in this outhouse. So I missed the next 3 days of the retreat. I can't attend again. So Gary's partner, Linda, comes out day 2, I was going to get an ambulance at some point, but it's like 2 hours from anywhere.
Yeah.
She comes out, they find me some, salts, whatever to drink and get my fluids back in me. And she comes in and she goes, "You know why this has happened, right?" And I'm like, "Uh-huh. I don't like listening to anybody's shit, and I don't like telling people about my own shit." And then 20 years later,
That's what you do.
that's what I do.
Well, that's I when you started into the circle, and I for some reason I saw that going there, and it's hilarious. If you open a space for people to talk about their experience, and if you are seeking for any kind of spiritual guidance or whatever, they're gonna say it. That
They want to tell you all. They want to say everything.
That reminds me of the last conversation you and I had during the yoga training, where I just I just fell apart at the end and had this crazy experience. And then the closing meditation, I was that guy. I was for like an hour and 15 minutes just bawling my eyes. I have no idea how long I talked, and I just imagine the very, very supportive, nurturing, lovely women that I took the yoga training teacher training with. They listened for as long as I apparently needed. And, at one point I felt a little sorry, but then I was like, you know what, this is actually what I need. And, fortunately it's just one person.
Well, that's the thing. It's one person. It's an experience. We'd all been together for, 4 or 5 days, and there was 10 of us or 11 of us,
Yeah.
so that's a little, and we knew each other.
Yes.
So that was appropriate. And I'm not saying they were in the wrong. I'm telling the story like I fully take responsibility for, I just wasn't ready at that point energetically. I didn't understand my empath abilities and all that. And I just took it all in. Right. And I just couldn't handle it.
Well, that's the key thing right there is, there's a listening and there's a holding space, and then there's a dysfunctional empath reaction, which is, oh, there's 40 people that want to give me their problems. I better take it all. That's we've discussed that, many times. And I think we even talked about that at one point, the dysfunction of something, it kind of manifests almost from the same mechanism as a healthy aspect of something. Empathy is a good thing when it's balanced. When it's dysfunctional, it's not good. It becomes this self-indulgent quest to try to take everybody's pain from them, very, very naively, right? Very like, well, if I can just stop their suffering, then I can make everything better. That I lived my life that way for quite a long time, and it ultimately it's there's always new problems. You cannot consume enough of people's problems to make a dent in anything, because ultimately I think that the self-reflection process, shows you that you are here to manage your experience, manage your suffering, manage your walk through life, through ascendance. And that was one thing that I really appreciated Trisha mentioned, was don't compare yourself to anybody else's spiritual journey. And I know that's kind of that's somewhat of a I don't want to say kindergarten thing, but we're great. It's like, don't compare yourself. You're unique. It's like, you are unique, but you're not just unique. You are in a different time, in a different space, at a different place for you yourself that you committed to, and it's not important how you compare yourself to other people. It will not serve you at all. It will help you devolve really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, my saying that I tell people is if you compare yourself to anybody, you're going to lose 50% of the time and win 50% of the time. It's heading down a hole that is never a good thing. And and it is just a function of the ego, because the ego wants to measure. And it's just a good thing not to do in general. look at, I mean, it's, look at your neighbors and see what they have. It's like, and I love that saying. My favorite saying is that when you point your finger at somebody else, you've got three fingers pointing back at you. It's like, because the thing is that when you compare yourself or concern yourself with others, it's actually easier because it's taking the responsibility off of you and what's going on inside of you.
Yes.
And it's more challenging to do the self-inquiry journey, to take responsibility and to look inside. And that's like sort of coaching 101.
Yeah.
And what I love about meditation is that a lot of this stuff that we talk about happens automatically once you start meditating.
Yes.
Automatically, once you start a meditation practice, you just stop comparing yourself to others. You don't have to be told not to do it. You just are not interested anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, because when you do compare yourself, you're making a practice of looking for lack within yourself. Really,
Mm-hmm.
you're saying, well, that person has this that I don't have. Well, you're focused on what you don't have, but when you're in that meditation space and you're in that relationship with the meditation, with the godliness, with the universe, with spirit, there is abundance. There is infinite abundance in that meditative space. And the more you carry that with you, the less you carry the smallness of, well, but right now I don't have 60-inch TV. I was like, okay, well, what is it? 60-inch TV, anything of value, juxtaposed against the backdrop of infinite space and godly. It's no, not even close. But we do that. We have habits like that. And this is funny that I had an experience of jealousy today, just a feeling of jealousy, and I had two reactions. Well, I had the initial reaction was like I recognized that I was like, oh, I'm feeling jealous right now. And it was about it was about a Grammy. Grammy. And winning a Grammy is a big thing in the audio industry, or most and I felt, well, I don't have a Grammy. That's what I felt, and instead of, and my initial was like, oh, don't feel jealous, don't be jealous. And I was like, wait a minute, but I am. Let me look at this. Let me shine a light on this and reflect. Why do I feel jealous about something that, if I even really looked at it, what I value is beyond this certificate of social popularity? So immediately when I looked at that jealousy, it's like, why am I jealous, and why do I put importance on things that ultimately don't serve me and has no weight or bearing on the whole of what I have when I'm in meditation, which is, there is nothing to have because you have access to everything. You have access to that universal allness. And so it was interesting. And, go ahead.
And no, I was going to say another step to that is, because you've done a lot of work. And so you inquired within right away, like why, not just say, well, I'm not supposed to feel that way, but well, why do I feel that way? That's the way to heal it. Shine the light of consciousness on it. But it's also what I actually came up with this a couple of weeks ago when I was doing a coaching call. And I was like, okay, so find something in your room. So it was when you're looking straight at the camera, right? So if you're listening to the podcast or you're watching, like, find something in your room to look at. But notice that as you look at that something straight ahead, your peripheral vision can see everything to the right and everything. Well, not everything, but you can see a lot of stuff on the right and left. But you decide to focus on whatever it is you're focusing on, right? And so that's how our thoughts are, and how jealousy and fear and anger and everything is. It's like they're kind of all, we have, whatever they say, 65 to 75, 85,000 thoughts in a day. And so we don't have control over those thoughts in the day or either in meditation. But what we do have control over is where we decide to put our attention, what we decide to believe in.
Yes.
So the difference between somebody that hasn't done the work is they believe the jealousy, and then they'll go into it and they will live there.
Yes, correct. And yes, instead of bringing the periphery, the awareness, that the biggest space, and shine a light on that, and say, is this something I even want to believe, have, possess, live in? And almost certainly no, right? I mean, the answer is no, of course I don't want to be a jealous person. So then you say, cool, and let this pass and let it pass, but I think it's interesting because it's a very slippery slope because, for a second I did focus on that. I said, well, let's look at this, but it was with curiosity. It
That's
was,
the key.
it was, it was something to explore, not something I identified with. And that actually felt really good for me today. I kind of had a little chip on my shoulder about it. I was like, I don't identify with jealousy, even when it comes up. I kind of had that experience, but
Yeah.
I mean, it was a pride, I guess, but it was that's how that process is triumphed, is why I am experiencing jealousy. I didn't say I'm jealous. I'm feeling this jealousy. The same thing with a thought. It's I had this thought come into view. I didn't say this is my thought, and that's the difference in that separation and not attachment is these thoughts are, like you said, very uncontrollable. They just almost certainly they're going to keep running their course and they're going to do their best. They're going to fight for that focal position, and the practice that meditation gives you is to detach yourself from that and to take those thoughts for what they are. They are just thoughts. And you have that experience of cool, fun thought, jealousy. Oh, fun thought. I don't have enough money. That's a fun thought. I'm sure people are having that thought right now, but it's like, that's not my truth. That's not real. That's not my belief. That's not, accurate. And once you say that, the thought almost immediately goes away. And then I started to have these feelings of, then I was proud for this person that I had some jealousy towards. I was like, well, good for that person. I hope they're experiencing good things from that. I hope they're growing. I hope they're having peace from this, or I hope they feel proud of themselves. I hope they're working hard. And then I started to really have gratitude for that person's experience instead of a sense of lack, So it was a powerful moment today to have that. And, this conversation that we just had really kind of reflected and embodied the energy and the spirit of non-judgment, to have in those experiences.
I love that.
It's weird. It's almost uncanny. It's strange,
Yeah, when it spontaneously starts to happen, and it seems spontaneous, and it is spontaneous, but it's because of all the work that you've done. It's because of the conversations. It's because of the meditation. You're becoming more mindful,
Yes.
and you're becoming more, less identified with your thinking and more identified with the present moment. I mean, it might be a fact that somebody doesn't have money right now, a lot of money right now, but you don't have to go into the story about that. Well, the fear of the future and the what am I going to do? And it's like, okay, what can I do in this moment about the money that I don't have? And you
Right.
just focus on this moment about, coming up with something creative. My niece, I was on the phone with my niece, and she's 23, almost 23, and riding horses up in Toronto. She's pursuing her dream of doing some championship, like Olympic type riding. And so she went all the way from Alberta to Toronto with 2 horses and staying in an apartment, away from home for the first time, because she did college, while she was living at home. And it's costing her a lot of money to board 2 horses and take these championship lessons.
Yeah.
Actually, she said it was $8,000 a month. She's 23 and she saved a shitload of money, and she's spending all her own money on it. She's saved her money like crazy since she's a good saver, but she can only do it for a certain amount of time. So she's coming up with all these creative ways to make money so she can stay, because she wants to stay. It's really important to her. And it's like, I tell people that, like, I've never been like, as far as maybe a person who has a ton of money in the bank and owns a house. Like, I've never had a lot of money, but I've always done whatever I want to do, and I've always had enough money to travel and to buy cars and, live and live a very nice life, have nice clothes, whatever, just because I don't, I always come up with creative solutions in order to make money. Where there's a will, there's a way.
Yes.
And I loved hearing my niece. She was actually coming up with like a business plan to give her dad to do some marketing for him. She did a little bit of marketing for him in the summertime, and she's coming up with a business plan. And she's also has a huge wit. Like, she's super smart and super funny. I'd send her photos and I say, "Can you caption this?" And she goes, "Yeah, other people do that too." And I'm like, "Girl, you get paid for that.
Yeah.
You get paid to caption, like, do some copy." Anyways, there are creative solutions to things. So instead of allowing your mind to go in the rabbit hole of jealousy and everything you don't have, and then, oh, maybe I wasted the past 10 years and what did this person do? Like, at the big story, it's like, okay, I'm curious about it. This is interesting.
Yeah.
I'm acknowledging the feeling. Do I even want that? And then if I do want that, maybe what can I do, the steps to do? Or maybe I don't even want that. Like, it's like really, and this is what it means to know yourself.
Yes. Yeah. And be patient and forgiving with yourself as you learn about yourself. Because that has been a big problem for me, is not forgiving myself and being very hard on myself. Take the example of jealousy. In the past, I'm like, "You fucking idiot. Like, you know better than that. You know better than to be jealous." It's like, oh, now I'm going to spend a whole day or week, worried about being jealous. Same thing like your niece. She knows the limitations of her savings, and she can look at that and say she could spend all week worrying about what happens at the end of next month when it runs out, or you can focus on steps to perpetuate something that you love, and having gratitude and having humbleness, and knowing that this is my passion. I'm not attached to this, but I love this. I'm feeling a lot of joy from this. I get to list the many things that you get to experience from this, and bring with to other people, and how you can share that experience with other people in a positive way, and then move forward with steps to perpetuate that, instead of being afraid of how that's going to end. And it's and again, like you said, that's the process of knowing yourself and learning about yourself. And one of the key ingredients, and this has come up a few times, is forgiving other people, not judging other people's, and forgiving yourself and not judging yourself, because you're learning your truth. And it's very unique, and it's very different, and it's probably extremely contrast to your programming. That's the other thing, is like, the programming is deep. It's very difficult. It's hard to break away from it. It takes many years in a lot of cases to break through that. But you're constantly at odds with that programming, and you're trying to figure out who you are outside of that programming. That takes a long time. So have fun with it. Be curious about it. Have that forgiveness and that love and that joy, that both Trisha and Tom carry with them. Love that about yourself. Love that you don't know. Be patient with that you don't know, and then go have fun with it and laugh. That's how I think we make these very powerful incremental steps forward.
Yeah. Lighten up.
Lighten up.
Don't take it all so seriously. And then, because creativity happens out of space. Edison invented electricity when he was flying a kite, not when he was at the drawing table.
Yes.
It's like creativity and living life in a creative way is like, relax and have fun. And
Yes.
yeah. Another good podcast, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely. That hit me. I'm going to listen over that one and, kind of revel in some of those nuggets of very powerful wisdom.
One more. We only have one more to record before the end of the year.
Oh, wow. That's right. That's coming up. I have mixed feelings about that. I feel like 2020 needs to be over big time, but I'm also very thankful for 2020. I think it shed a lot of light on a lot of, craziness and chaos and things that we haven't really moved past in life. So it's it's been a bittersweet year, I suppose.
Yeah.
But cheers to moving forward. Cheers to lovely ladies like you and Trisha, and all the rest that are patient and very, very patient as we bring some of these balancing energies into our life and society and culture.
Absolutely.
Well,
And thank you for being the balanced male, so insightful and so compassionate. People love you. That's why I want to do the podcast with you. I love you.
I love you too. I love all y'all. I love everybody that's come on, and I love everybody that's listening. So
It's a
let's go.
big love fest.
Big love.
Big love. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right.